Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Munir Lazouzi from easymedicaldevice.com. And today we wanted to talk about PMCF. So we already had some episode before about PMCF, but this time I invited a notified body, so TÜV SÜD, to help us to understand how they view the PMCF. So I have with me Matthias Fink, which is the manager clinical focus team at TÜV SÜD North America. So Matthias, welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Thank you. Welcome. And thank you for the invitation to be here. And I would like to provide some notified body insight. As you all know, we notified bodies cannot consult, but at least we can provide some insight and some experience we gained so far with PMCF under the MDR.
Yeah, exactly. We all know, I think, since now a few years that notified bodies cannot consult, they cannot get any, if I can say, give any advice to a specific customers, etc., unless you have a contract with them and discuss with them directly. But yeah, this is something that a lot of notified bodies are warning us. So be careful for this kind of thing. So Matthias, just before maybe to talk about PMCF, can we have a small introduction of yourself? Of what you are doing exactly?
Sure, of course. Well, my name is Matthias Fink. As you have seen already, my background is I'm a medical doctor. I'm a board-certified orthopedic surgeon in Germany. Spent 17 years of my clinical career as an orthopedic trauma surgeon. And 6 years ago, I was approached by TÜV SÜD and they hired me, and I started as a clinical reviewer, reviewing all type of medical devices with a focus on orthopedic devices. I'm now also the senior global expert for orthopedic devices within TÜV SÜD. And after I transferred to our US operations, I'm now also since 2 years the manager of the clinical team here in the US.
Great. So thank you for that. And I'm sure, this will be really, I hope all what we'll discuss today will be helping a lot of the manufacturers on how to submit or how to provide a lot of information related to PMCF. So Matthias, my first question is mainly about we try really to interpret each time we are reading the EU MDR, we try to interpret it and read it and understand it, etc. But when we start to look at the EU MDR, when we look at the requirements for PMCF and also the requirements for PMS, we see that there is a lot of links or a lot of similarities. So for you or for a notified body, what is really the difference here between PMS and PMCF? Can we make them comparable, or they are really different completely?
No, they are not different. They are basically it's one big topic, and the PMCF is part of the PMS, of the post-market surveillance. Let me quickly, before I move into this, quickly say, because we all thought when the MDR was published, we thought, okay, now we have a much more bigger regulation. Everything is clear now. So we don't need all those guidance documents, all those discussions about different interpretations. Unfortunately, MDR is published since, 5 years now, 2017, and we already have more MDCG guidance documents than we had MEDEF documents in over 30 years of the MDD. So, and that's why it's very important. You need to read the MDR not once, not two, not three times. You need to read at least the relevant sections a couple of times. And you always will find new topics, and probably, or you will hear something, different interpretations. And that's unfortunately the reason we need a lot of these guidance documents to get a common interpretation of the MDR. And especially with the post-market surveillance, the PMS, what we're talking about today, we're waiting for one big guidance document, which is the one on the PSUR, the Periodic Safety Update Report, which is a required on the MDR. The MDR date of application was nearly a year ago. And it looks like now in May this year, we hopefully will get this PSUR guidance document everyone is waiting for. So coming back to your question, PMS is always required. If you look at Chapter 7 and Annex 3 of the MDR, it very clearly defines what is required as a post-market system. And if you see or look at the requirements for a post-market surveillance plan as laid out in Annex 3, it says in the last indent that it requires a PMCF. So PMCF is one part of the PMS, and you cannot consider one without the other.
Okay.
Of course, It has a little bit of a different focus. PMS, post-market surveillance, is more, let's say, the general surveillance activities. You have to consider all the vigilance. You have to do all the feedback You might getting complaints, sales data, and whatnot. And PMCF, post-market clinical follow-up, is really specifically the requirement and how manufacturers are collecting specifically clinical data for their device. But overall, it's part of the whole PMS system.
So can we have in one side a PMS and in the other side a PMCF, or can we have them all together in one document only? Is there some best practices here?
Well, as I said, the PMCF is mentioned as part of the PMS plan, but 2020 MDCG guidance document, the 2020-7 on the template on the PMCF plan was published. And yes, it's an MDCG, it's a guidance document. We all know all these guidance documents are not legally binding, but they reflect the current interpretation of the MDR. And for us as notified bodies, we are required by our competent authorities in the different member states to follow these MDCG documents. So this is one of the advices I can give manufacturers who are listening here. Use this MDCG guidance document, use this MDCG 2020-7 template for the PMCF plan, because the notified bodies are required to challenge you on the content, even if you might have your own template, might have your own PMCF plan. Please be ready. You might get challenged on the content which is required on this MDCG document. So that's really something that should be followed here. Yeah.
So better than to have two documents, one for PMS and one for PMCF that is following the MDCG guidance, I suppose.
It probably make the workload easier on both sides, manufacturer side and the notified body side, if you have two separate documents. And based on what we've seen so far, most manufacturers have a separate PMCF plan. But there is no specific requirement. It could also be like an annex or just a chapter of the PMS plan.
Okay, but following the MDCG guidance. So mainly on this annex, it should be really mentioning everything that is mentioned or displayed on the MDCG guidance. Then
exactly. As a manufacturer is not required to use this template. We on the other hand are required to at least assess the content of the PMCF plan according to this MDCG paper. So as I said, that's really something I recommend manufacturers should familiarize themselves with the MDCG 2020-7 and make sure that all the relevant aspects are considered in their own PMCF plan.
Okay. The next point is mainly about PMCF. As I've said, when we read the EU MDR, we read the word PMCF, and we see sometimes it says PMCF survey. So when we talk about PMCF, is there only one PMCF, or is there multiple PMCF that we can consider here with the MDR? I mean, it's not clear. It's clear for me because I understand how it's working, but I suppose for people that are reading the MDR maybe for the first time, as you've said, it's maybe not clear. When we talk about PMCF, it's not really well described, I suppose.
No, I mean, looking where this is coming from, if you look back to the MDD or AIMDD, the MDD, when we are talking about PMCF, everyone automatically assumed, okay, PMCF means a PMCF study. If you're looking now at the MDR now includes in Annex 14, Part B, where is the PMCF plan, they say, okay, there could be specific PMCF activities like studies, so we're back to the PMCF study, or like a registry, for example, but also a survey. I mean, a PMCF post-market clinical follow-up could be any activity initiated by the manufacturer to collect clinical data for their device in the post-market setting. Again, it could be anything from a survey, but then of course it has to be ensured that the survey really has a certain quality, up to a full blown clinical investigation like a post-market clinical follow-up study.
But if I don't need to do all that, because there is also one sentence that everybody is reading and say, I will use that, which is a justification for not having a PMCF. They say, oh, I have a justification for not having a PMCF, so I don't need to go through all that. So can you maybe just clarify this point here?
Yeah, I'm not very happy with that specific sentence, and I'm not sure if it really is meant that way or everyone is interpreting it this way. Because if we are looking again at the requirements for a PMCF plan in Annex 14 Part B, the PMCF plan requires general PMCF activities, like they say, for example, customer feedback, clinical literature research. So just basically plain literature database research without any specific goals there, just trying to get some clinical data on the device. And then they differentiate, on the other hand, saying specific PMCF activities. And that's what I said before, like studies, specific surveys, registries. These are all considered specific PMCF activities. And if you look a little bit more in the detail, if you look a little bit back, what we have under the MDD, there we will always have this differentiation between, let's say, reactive and proactive PMCF activities. The reactive PMCF activity, like basically the general PMCF activities, is the one the manufacturer cannot really influence.
Okay.
If they get a feedback, or if someone published some kind of article mentioning their device, they should know about that. They should, even if they claim that they do not need specific PMCF activities, like they have sufficient data, or they only have performance-based data for certain low-risk devices, they always should be aware and the lookout. Okay, maybe someone is something publishing about one of our devices. So the general PMCF activities, also like any kind of feedback, like if the manufacturer is at a medical conference and they speak to key opinion leaders and get some feedback, or someone is going to call them and say, well, I was using your device, but I had some suggestions, or I had some problems. This is general PMCF, which is always applicable. Specific PMCF, like really something a manufacturer is initiating to collect specific data for their device, like in a study, or they are addressing some specific registries they are aware of and might get some ad hoc data from there. That might not be always required. So I would like to see if the MDR would say as well, or a justification why no specific PMCF activity is required, because in my opinion, and I've spoken to a lot of people from other notified bodies, it's very generally accepted opinion that the general PMCF activity is always required.
So just to summarize, so if we talk about PMCF, we have to see it in two phases. We have the general PMCF, which is, we say, required for everybody. So everybody should have a PMCF, a general PMCF, and they have to justify inside if they need a specific PMCF, saying that we need some specific activities additionally to get that. Is it really well summarized?
Yes, exactly. General PMCF activity should always be part of the post-market surveillance activities. If you're looking back under the MDD, and we had the PMS plan under the MDD didn't require a specific PMCF plan. We always had the PMS plan. This is nothing new under the MDR. Manufacturers were always collecting the feedback, complaints. They're always using key opinion leaders and whatnot to get some feedback. They always did a literature search. So these activities, which already were part in a lot of manufacturers under the MDD, are now reworded into the general PMCF activities. They're always required. And for the specific, as you said, it really depends if the manufacturer during its clinical evaluation comes to a conclusion. We have some data gaps, or we have some, let's say, limited amount of data for certain indications, certain patient populations. That's why we need to generate specifically data for these indications.
So some people are comparing the specific or PMCF or PMCF survey to clinical investigations because they say, oh, we have to engage with centers, we have to recruit some patients, we have to maybe get some authorization to do that. So is it that, or there is really here a misunderstanding?
Well, the survey, a lot of people review the survey as the holy solution for everything, because a survey could be considered a specific PMCF activity, but it really depends on the quality of the type of survey. Also a study is a very broad term. And in my last 6 years working for a notified body, I've seen a lot of what manufacturers consider a study, and some of them are really well-defined studies following ISO 14155, for example, but sometimes are more like just a summary of a couple of case reports, and they still were considered a study. So unless you define it clearly, a study like considering what is laid out in Annex 15, a study could be everything. It's the same with a survey. You could do a survey, for example, sending out to, 50 users of the device, put in, let's say, 5 smileys from very sad to very happy smiley, and said, okay, please check how satisfied you're with the device. You probably get a very high return rate because it's very quick and easy to do. But this is more like a marketing thing, doesn't really help you in clinical data. If you show up at a notified body and say, oh, we got 25 happy and 25 less happy smileys for our PMCF survey, it's not going to work. But you can do you can do a survey very closely to the requirements of a clinical study. So you have a plan for the survey. You clearly need to consider, okay, what are my endpoints? What do I need safety data? Do I need performance data? Yeah, there's specific, I said this before, patient populations, niche indications. My device is indicated for that I would probably need some data. And the survey should also be based on a certain plan. You need to have some, at least, statistical considerations here, because there's always a very high rate of surveys which are not going to get answered. So you need to calculate a very high possible dropout rate. And if you have a survey that follows a certain scientific standard, then, of course, a survey could be a very helpful tool to generate specific PMCF data.
So as you said, so there is all those statistics. So there is the number of patients that we need maybe to involve on that. You have some plan to create and then to elaborate on this. And you have really to focus on risks for the patients or indications or etc. And not marketing to say, are you happy with the device or not? I mean, something that's really subjective. So we have really to be focused on something that we can really evaluate and something that is really concrete. In the case, for example, I mean, we know that since 2 years now, we had this COVID situation. We know that a lot of manufacturers started to create their PMCF plan and they said, oh, we'll have 200 patients in our study and we will gather all those data. And then in 1 year, we'll provide you a report, etc. But COVID arrived and we cannot follow the plan as what we have planned here. So are you understanding that, or what exactly you are expecting from the manufacturers to come with to say, yes, here was the plan, but we cannot follow our plan. So we are now in the middle of the desert because we don't know what to do. So what can they do then with that?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And here's one of the very few advices we can give as a notified body. Really proactively talk to us, talk to your notified body. We've seen this not only during the last 2 years, but especially during the last 2 years of COVID. A lot of hospitals limited their inpatient contact. A lot of things were switched to telemedicine. A lot of operations were canceled. Patients were afraid to go to hospital just for routine checkup. And a lot of studies, of course, were put on hold because clearly we had a different focus in the healthcare sector the last 2 years than probably doing a PMCF study, for example. But we've also seen in the last 2 years, and I think this is where COVID really initiated something that's definitely here to stay. A lot of study protocols, and we're now switched to a little bit more like a virtual setup. Things that in the past were done with inpatient in the hospital can now be done, let's say, virtually. Patients can be follow up via telemedicine calls, video conference calls. So it's clearly something that might, in the long run, help manufacturers because it established a lot of platforms and systems how hospitals can interact with patients. So in the long run, we might want to see even maybe a better quality of this type of studies, PMCF studies. But of course, right now in the actual situation, especially at the beginning in 2020 when COVID started, a lot of manufacturers came to us, contacted us because they had probably an ongoing PMCF study. There was a condition set by the notified body, okay, please, within 12 months or so, we need to see at least interim data. And of course, we are aware of the situation. We have a clinical team. We have physicians working at TÜV SÜD. We understand, we know the situations. We all have worked in hospitals, so we know the situation there. Yeah. And that's why it's so important to talk to a notified body. And if you can provide a comprehensive justification, let's say during COVID, a lot of operations were postponed or canceled, why you not be able to reach a certain goal, or might not be able to provide the data that you, let's say, promised at some point to a notified body. We are always here to talk to you and accept this.
Yeah, it's better to do that proactively instead of waiting that the auditor is arriving and asking you the data and you say, I don't have them. I suppose it's better to do that in that way.
Exactly. Don't wait until you get the email from the notified body. Your data were due 4 weeks ago, or you had to plan to submit us the final study report 4 weeks ago. What happened? So this is really one advice I can give everyone out there. If you run into difficulties, and it doesn't have to be COVID related, we all know conducting a clinical investigation, clinical study takes a long time. There are bumps along the way. There might be delays for whatever reasons. Very important is whenever you run into a problem, talk to the notified body. They are there to listen and they are there to understand.
Great. No, I think it's really good advice, and I hope people that are listening are maybe now not afraid anymore to contact you maybe and to discuss with you directly. So we have now this MDR, as you said, since last year, but people were already certified before that. So I suppose that now you have reviewed some of the PMCF of the customers. So I suppose you have also seen maybe common mistakes or common issues that people are doing. So do you have maybe some advice, or can you maybe list some of those mistakes, if I can say, and then help people to say, in that case, don't do this or don't do that, or give some advice for when they will be submitting their PMCF next time?
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, I cannot go into any detail or provide any clear example. I don't want any listener out there sitting, wait a moment, this is what we discussed with us a couple of weeks ago. But of course, the MDR is enforced now, or was published 5 years ago. And we at TÜV SÜD, roughly last 2 years now, we are doing a lot of MDR reviews. I was involved in a lot of these projects. So you see, of course, let's say some common mistakes that you see a couple of times. So one, of course, is that manufacturers, probably before the MDCG 2020-7, the PMCF plan template was published, they already had their own template for a PMCF plan, which were based, of course, on the requirements as laid out in Annex 14 Part B. But the MDCG is much more detailed, and the MDCG has some topics in there which are not directly written in the MDR. It's the interpretation of the MDR. So we've seen a manufacturer probably had to update their PMCF plan because they had a template which was not considering the MDCG. But my feedback is, and what I've seen, manufacturers are always quite happy if they get something like the PMCF plan template, something they can use, they can work with. Because if they use this type of templates, it in most situations reduces the number of questions they're getting from a notified body. Yeah, so and really, that's something we have seen at the beginning, that manufacturers had to make this active switch, and now we see it more and more they're using this template.
No, I think it's completely right, because even me, before this template is published, I know that a lot of people were asking me, do you have a template for PMCF? Do you have this? We started to create something, but I say I cannot tell you it's the right thing because we are waiting for this guidance. But we cannot really think of everything by ourselves. So having a guidance like that, having a template is helping us, if I can say, to be all aligned. Like when we have on the MDR Annex 2 and Annex 3 that says to us exactly how should look like a technical file, is helping us also, instead of being, if I can say, in an interpretation and just providing what we think is good here. So the PMCF template, there is the plan, and I think there is also the PMCF report template that was published by the MDCGs, correct?
Exactly. This is the MDCG 2020-8. So that basically we are published on the same day. It's the plan, the 2020-7, and the PMCF evaluation report. I think that's the official name. It's the 2020-8, which is basically a mirror of the 2020-7. So basically every section that is in the plan is now reflected in the report. And of course, if the manufacturer is using the PMCF plan template, it should be logical that they're also using the PMCF report template, the 2020-8. And then, of course, this PMCF plan evaluation report then goes into the PSUR, the Periodic Safety Update report, which is the other big issues we are seeing right now, which leaves even more still leaves more uncertainty right now, because since we already issued MDR certificates in the last 2 years, and for implantable 2B and Class 3 device, manufacturers need to submit the first PSUR 1 year after the issuing of the CE certificate. So we're already seeing PSURs. We need to review PSURs. Article 86 is even shorter than Part B of Annex 14 on the PMCF. So we have a very vague understanding how detailed a PSUR should be. We see PSURs already. We have to review them. Right now, we read them based on our own report template, and everyone really is waiting for this PSUR MDCG guidance. As I said earlier, the last information I got very recently, it should be published in May this year.
Okay, so
still 1 year too late, but at least that's a big milestone, hopefully.
Yeah, I can imagine. So yeah, it's also a question that people were asking. So we have the PMCF plan, but the report is later. It's the same for the PMS. The PMS plan, you have it for your submission to the notified body, but you normally write inside when that 1 year later you will get the report. So you should not come. I mean, I have seen some that says, oh, I should also come with the plan and the report. I said, yeah, but if you plan something, you will not get immediately the information. So you have to wait maybe 1 year to get this information. So is it a correct interpretation to say you will receive the information about the plan, but you are expecting to get the reports 1 year later?
I have to look at this a little bit more in detail, depending, of course. Let's say, example A, we're having a novel device, not CE mark under the MDD before, so they come to the notified body for the first time. Okay. Of course, they have no post-market data, nothing. They probably did a pre-market investigation. So they apply to the CE mark at the notified body for the first time for that type of device. Of course, they need to have a PMS plan and they need to have the PMCF plan already. Yeah. So that's quite straightforward. Now we're looking at the other example, B, a manufacturer of a legacy device, meaning any device which already was marketed and had the CE mark under the MDD. Of course, they already, regardless if it's 1 year or 10 years on the market, they already have some post-market data because PMS was always required already under the MDD. So of course, if they now make the initial application for a CE mark under the MDR, they also need to have a PMS and the PMCF plan according to the MDR requirements. But of course, since they already have post-market data, they need to submit them. Okay. Of course, this is part of clinical data. They are not required to use, let's say, if they already did some PMCF in the past, they are not required to use the PMCF evaluation report template, the 2020-8. Because they basically the date of their application for the CE mark under MDR, they are starting their PMCF activity according to the MDR. Yeah? But they should have either included in the CER and the evaluation report their PMCF data. A lot of manufacturers already had some form of a PMS report in the past where there was all their post-market surveillance data, like vigilance data, complaints, sales data, publicly available databases, whatnot. So they clearly need to disclose that and present that. Okay. But they do not need to have a PSUR or a PMCF evaluation report when they apply for the CE mark for the first time.
Okay, no, I think it's a good advice also, because I think that a lot of people were interpreting it on the fact, it's a first certification, even they were under MDD, but it's a first certification under MDR. So we start everything from zero. But no, as it was already on the market, you have still some data that you can publish for the MDR, which is great. Some other mistakes maybe that you have?
I mean, not really mistakes, but things that people need to consider. One thing, of course, is also we are still in the grace period until 2024. So manufacturers with an MDD or AMDD certified device are still allowed to put this on the market until 2024. One thing to remember here, even the MDR or date of application of the MDR was delayed from May 20 to May 21. The grace period remained the same. So under the initial plan of the MDR, we had a 4-year grace period. This is now reduced to a 3-year grace period, which started in May last year. We already in April 2022. So the grace period where manufacturers of an MDD certificate can place the device on the market, this is over in 2 years. So everyone who is not ready right now, working with the notified body, getting their applications underway, and still probably working on, let's say, a plan how to get and when to get their MDR certificate, they really have to hurry up. So this is clearly something everyone needs to consider. This is a hard deadline at this point. I haven't heard anything. There are discussions coming from the industry that they say, okay, and we all know there will be a big wave of certificates expiring in 2024. There will be a huge wave of applications coming in notified body way, especially the next year. So there is some discussion already to maybe postpone this deadline on the industry side. So far, we haven't heard anything out of Brussels yet. So that's really something to consider. And the other thing, which I think is also relevant, we have the MDCG 2020-6. I'm sorry if I'm spilling all out the MDCGs today, but this is the one, especially for legacy devices, which already had this CE mark under the MDD and now making the transition to the MDR, and which might not have sufficient clinical data. And this MDCG document provides a definition of well-established technologies. And for these type of devices, it's very important. Not every legacy device, which is already MDD certified, is a well-established technology. But for these devices, there might be a more lenient way to make a transition to the MDR with less clinical data. But if a manufacturer is using this justification because they have a device that can be considered well-established technology, and then getting the MDR certificate, they need to have a very stringent PMCF activity. And here we're talking about a specific activity in place to collect more data under the MDR to close this data gap they identified during the MDD period.
It's an important point that you are mentioning here, because I have also had the experience with making some CERs that had some data, but for me, maybe not enough. And we used the fact that we will open a PMCF specific to collect more data while the device is on the market. So is this strategy to say the CR, maybe we have some data, but we can maybe get more? And as we don't have time to get more because we still need to maybe make some studies for that, opening a PMCF is something that can be convincing a notified body to say, okay, we agree, opening a PMCF can help you a lot. Is this something that maybe you would accept?
No, certainly. I mean, now you're briefly touching the big question of the MDR. What is sufficient clinical data? I mean, I think this would fill another whole podcast to define sufficient clinical data. And unfortunately, I don't want to spoil anything here. It's not an easy answer. But that's exactly what a PMCF and the specific PMCF activity is meant for. If the manufacturer during their 5 stages of clinical evaluation come to the conclusion at the end, okay, let's say we have 3 indications for our device. They are a little bit different from the medical condition. So we cannot just use the clinical data interchangeably. So we need to identify 3 different data sets to cover all 3 different indications. And they might come to the conclusion, okay, we have sufficient clinical data for indication 1 and 2, but we clearly see for whatever reason have not enough data at this point for indication 3. They might be able to use, because it's a well-established technology device, MDCG 2020-7, use data of a lower quality at this point to make a decision in the MDR, but then it's clearly expected that they proactively close this data gap and initiate some specific PMCF activity. I'm not saying it has to be a study. It depends on the device, on the risk class, and let's say the type of indication in this case. But to close this data gap, and again, we will see every 5 years is the usual the turnaround time that notified bodies review the full documentation, to get some more data than to close this type of data gaps.
So so the PMCF can be a solution, but it's not really the solution. I mean, I suppose it's also case by case for each product one by one. You have to look at that, but yeah, it's something that you have to look at. So one thing that you've said which is important is that you are having some intended purpose for your device. So with indication, some claims for your device. So each claims should be backed up by some clinical data. Each claims one by one. So if you have 3 claims, as you've said, and if only one is not backed up by clinical data, can we then claim the device for that? Or should we say, no, then we remove that from our claims?
That depends on the claim. Let's say indications are claims as well. The medical claims are the indications. That really depends on the indications. And that's the reason why notified bodies are now really required to have clinical expertise. We at TÜV SÜD already are working on building up our clinical team since the last 6 or 7 years. And that is also the reason why manufacturers need to have a broader team of clinical evaluators and need to have some clinical expertise, either internally or working with external medical consultants, because they need to define, they basically need to define, we make 3 different medical claims, like we have 3 different indications. And can we use, let's say, one data set to cover all indications, or do we need specific data sets for different indications? And that really depends, depending on what they define, how detailed and what level of granularity they're going down to indications. Let's say if we go down, and this is my home turf here, if we go down to orthopedic trauma devices, there's a very detailed classification of different fracture types. You can have one long bone, let's say the femur in the upper thigh, and there is a very detailed classification depending on the location, on the parts of the number of parts of the fracture. And if you want to go down to each and every one of these, this would be a huge CR with I don't know how many subchapters just on these different fracture types. Of course, some of them can be grouped together, but you cannot say, for example, you have a very simple shaft fracture of the femur with 2 pieces, and then you have a very complicated comminuted fracture of the distal part where the whole knee joint is destroyed. Of course, if the device works for the shaft fracture, it does not automatically, you cannot automatically conclude it works for a very difficult joint fracture. So these are the things that need to be considered. That requires clinical expertise on the manufacturer and then the notified body side. Some indications can be grouped, but I'm sorry to say that it will always be a case-by-case decision.
Yeah, I can look at, I can see that, and we understand, as we said, medical device can go from a wheelchair to a pacemaker to a MRI. So it's like really a big variety of products, which makes it like a bit difficult to have one solution that fits every product.
It's not possible.
It's not possible, exactly. So Matthias, really thank you. I think it was really covering a lot, all my questions. Do you have maybe a last advice, maybe for the auditors, or related maybe to PMCF, PMS, or even EU MDR?
Again, as I said, look and consider the MDCG documents. They are interpreted, or they are the current interpretation, and should be considered by every stakeholder. Everyone, as said, with the PSUR, we have to wait. We have to see what is coming up, or how it's going to get published. Also with the PSUR, is very closely linked to the UDAMED. We still don't wait for the UDAMED module. So unfortunately, a lot of things we should have had at least since 2 years now, we are still waiting for. Very important also, make sure that you understand the differences between a general and specific PMCF activity, and that you make a very clear, detailed analysis during clinical evaluation, which type of specific PMCF activity might be required. And if you come to the conclusion that this specific activity is applicable to your device, or you come to the conclusion that you do not need specific PMCF activity, always make sure provide a detailed justification for the notified body, because it's our job as a notified body to review your data, and then, okay, we can accept or cannot accept the justification. But this is not we are not in the position that we look at your data and then we make our justification saying, okay, I understand, that's why I can accept this, because we only basically assessing your justification and your explanations.
Exactly. They should provide you all the details, because you have really to understand all the story before you can make your own opinion of it. So which is great. Okay, so thank you, Matthias. For people that maybe wants to follow up with you, I will just place maybe your LinkedIn on the show notes. And maybe there will be also other links. We'll look at what we can provide to you for PMCF and activities, so that maybe can be helpful for the audience. But thank you, Matthias. Really was I think great answers, and I hope it will be helping all our audience here. For the people that are listening to this podcast, so don't hesitate, if you have any question or whatever, you can send me also an email at info@easymedicaldevice.com, and we'll try to help you. And if you have any questions to Matthias, as I said, I will put the LinkedIn, and he can really provide everything to you. So Matthias, really thank you, and I wish you a nice day.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, and have a nice day too. Bye.
Bye.